The NJN New York Times Republican gubernatorial debate.
Good evening. I'm Kent Manahan. Welcome to the NJN New York Times Republican gubernatorial debate. For the next hour, the two Republican primary candidates will take questions from a panel of reporters as well as from our viewers. We are here before a live audience in our NJN studios in Trenton. The GOP candidates are former Congressman Bob Franks and Jersey City Mayor Bret Schundler. Our panel of reporters includes Jerry Gray, the New York Times continuous news editor and former Trenton bureau chief, NJN senior political correspondent Michael Aron, and New York Times columnist Matthew Purdy. We are going to begin our program this evening with opening statements from each of the candidates. We start with Bob Franks, who has 90 seconds.
Good evening. I'm proud to be an active and loyal Republican. I've been one all my life. Not only have I been elected to office 11 times, but I've been proud to serve as our Republican state chairman on 2 different occasions. Like all of you, I'm committed to winning this November. We simply cannot allow Jim McGreevey and his liberal allies to take over the State House. And I am the only Republican who can get that job done. Why? Because a development has occurred since our last debate that casts a dark shadow over Bret Schundler's campaign. Last Friday, a New Jersey state judge found that Mr. Schundler diverted $885,000 of children's scholarship money to buy political television ads designed to help his campaign for governor. The facts are clear. Bret Schundler spent as much on political commercials in 5 weeks as his scholarship fund spent on scholarships in 5 years. This is not conjecture. It is a fact found by a judge. Jim McGreevey would use this issue to devastate our Republican Party this fall. Bret, taking money away from needy children and using it for your own political purposes is just wrong. I call on you tonight to give the money back. Return it so needy children can finally get all of the scholarship money they deserve. Bret, I'm asking you right now, are you going to give the money back? The Republican voters of New Jersey deserve an answer.
Mr. Schundler, you are next.
There are better ways that we can be doing things here in New Jersey. We can be doing a lot more while spending less. And for an example of that, you can look at my experience in Jersey City. When I came into office, we had a $40 million structural deficit, and the skeptics said that the only way to deal with that deficit would be to increase property taxes dramatically. We didn't do that. We found creative ways to get property taxes down, in fact, in that first year. And now, even 10 years later, property taxes are still down, even though we've had 10 years of inflation, even though we've also had our annual state funding cut by $11 million per year, I suspect as a reward for my running against Don DeFrancesco for governor. Now, the bottom line is if you can find anybody else who, after 10 years, has been able to keep their property taxes from rising, where they're actually lower today than they were 10 years ago, you should vote for that guy for governor. Because we need someone who's going to be able to deal with the same kind of problems at the state level. Now, Bob has a very significant problem with the truth, as we'll discover during the course of this debate. I'll address the issue on the scholarships later, but I think you'll find out that his comments have nothing to do with reality. What is the case is that we've had control in Trenton over this last 9 years. The people who are backing Bob have been the people who are in positions of power. And during that period, we've had property taxes rising. We've had our state income tax get to the effective state income tax get to its highest level ever. We've seen sprawl get worse. We've seen the parkway tolls go up as well.
Mr.
For
Schundler?
all this money, we have not seen education getting better.
Mr. Schundler and Mr.
I think
Franks,
we can do better.
Thank you very much. And gentlemen, now we are going to move on to our panel of reporters who have questions for the candidates this evening. We begin with Jerry Gray, whose question goes first to Mayor Schundler.
Mr. Schundler.
Right.
For the moment, put aside policy and politics and speak to us just as a resident and wage earner in New Jersey.
Right.
And tell us what quality of life issue about the state troubles you most.
I think the quality of life problem that most people are congested with or troubled by is increasing congestion, in particular traffic congestion. It bothers them that increasingly our green open spaces in this state are being paved over because it's always going to be cheaper to cut down trees and build there instead of go back to the cities and build on brownfields that have to first be remediated. But while it bothers us to see the beautiful green areas of the state being increasingly developed. It also is a frustration each and every day driving, because as we see this development happening, it's not just taking away the beauty of our state, it's making it almost impossible to get from here to there. That's one of the reasons I support reversing Mount Laurel, allowing our rural areas to have their local planning and zoning powers back again, so that if they want to avoid sprawl and increasing development, they have some ability to control that. And if the result of their not being so positive towards new development is that developers look to revitalize our cities, and we see our cities being revitalized not by public tax
Time
dollars.
is up. Mr. Franks, your response.
Just, we're going to
Jerry.
have to get a little better with the cards there.
All right.
Right.
We will make sure that you see the cards clearly.
When I see
All
the
right?
cards, but I'm just saying I'm still talking during the yellow.
All right. I'm going to be very strict on time because we have a lot of questions to cover. Mr. Franks, your response.
Jerry, let me be very clear about this. The quality of life issue that impacts New Jerseyans most is high property taxes. And that is, I believe, the most pressing issue confronting this campaign. Mayor Schundler wants you to believe that he's done a miraculous job with property taxes in Jersey City. Let me quote from you the March edition of the National Review, one of the leading conservative magazines in America. They said taxes are another issue on which Schundler might have staked the legacy, but didn't. As a candidate, he promised to trim property taxes, and he did reduce them, but they didn't stay low. In fact, his own gubernatorial campaign literature admits that they're 19% higher now than when he started out. That's hardly the record of a tax-slashing champion. I have met hundreds of senior citizens across this state who've been driven out of the homes that they've lived in for 20 and 30 years, where they've raised their children, where they anticipated an ability to retire. But because of ever-escalating property taxes, they are driven out. Middle-class homeowners can't buy that first home.
Mr. Schundler.
Taxes when I came into Jersey City were at $103 million. That's the tax levy we had, the total amount of dollars being taken from property taxpayers in 1990 and 1991. Now it's 2001. This year our tax levy is $102 million, which, Bob, is lower than $103 million. The average during this period was $91 million. That's where our levy would be today were it not for the fact that the state reduced our annual funding by $11 million as a reward for my running for office again, it seems. Now, he talks about...
Michael Aron, your question, please, for Mr. Franks.
Congressman Franks, both you and Mayor Schundler called on Supreme Court Justice Peter Vernero to resign over his role as Attorney General in the racial profiling matter. The next governor could make the decision on whether or not to reappoint Vernero to the Supreme Court in the first year of a second term. Could Peter Vernero's performance on the court over the next 4 or 5 years convince you to reappoint him?
No. Candidly, Michael, I think the people of New Jersey have a right to expect the highest quality of judicial performance from members of the Supreme Court. We have the right to be able to trust the people who sit on this state's highest judicial body. I'm disappointed, but I have to tell you that I think the people of New Jersey have lost the faith and confidence in Justice Vernero, to the point where it would be not productive to have him reappointed to a second term. I believe there are outstanding candidates for the bench who are available to us to pick for the Supreme Court. And let me say this, we need greater diversity on that court. We need someone from South Jersey to sit on the Supreme Court of New Jersey. We need a conservative. There is absolutely no philosophical balance in any way on that court today. They're all fine and decent and very bright people, but the quality of justice that they dispense could be enhanced by putting a strong conservative on that court. And I would also look for regional diversity to make sure that South Jersey had their representative on the Supreme Court.
Mr. Schundler, a 1-minute response.
I think it's absolutely fundamental that any Supreme Court justice should be someone who tells the truth. And Peter Vernero did not. I think that became very clear during the hearings. I also think that any governor should be someone who tells the truth, which is why I think Bob Franks immediately disqualifies himself. You look at his comment on the scholarships. The judge didn't find any such thing, and you will see that as you go forward. If what he's proposing is the case, then you'll see me docked by $800,000, and that's not going to happen. The reality is that we raise money specifically to educate the public about the fact that if we pass tax credits for scholarship giving, we could raise more scholarships and help a lot more families be able to make choices for what's best for their children. There's nothing wrong with that. By having tax incentives for that kind of giving, even Bob might be willing to help. Now, additionally, he's talked about me raising property taxes by 79%. All of the newspapers reviewing that claim have pointed out that it's false, that in fact, Jersey City's tax levy is lower today than it was 10 years ago. He references a year when we gave people half-year tax-free practically.
Time is up. Response, please. Your rebuttal, Mr. Franks, 30 seconds.
Bret, let's go to the Jersey City tax levy. You keep floating where you put the first marker. Let's look at the last full fiscal year before you were elected mayor in November of 1992. The last full fiscal year ran from July 1991 through June 1992. The tax levy that year was $98.1 million. Last year, it was 103. In your own words, Bret, 103 is greater than 98. No, you told the people of New Jersey a few minutes ago the tax levy is down.
Time
That's
is up.
not true.
Time is up. Matt Purdy, your question goes now to Mr. Schundler.
Mr. Schundler, you've spoken of your concern about morality and values. What state policies, programs, or laws fail your personal morality test? And how would you use your powers as governor to change them?
I think, as an example, one of the things we're teaching in our schools is that that people have different values and therefore there may not be any truth. That fundamental thing, to have an authoritative representative of the state, to go out and say, well, there's just different views on that, constantly may be undermining what a parent believes. I think that one of the things parents ought to be able to do is find an education for their child that reinforces their values. If they would like their child taught that there are different perspectives on things, that's fine. If they'd like their parent taught that things like, for instance, becoming sexually active before you're married is wrong, I think they ought to be able to choose that. That will never be the case until we allow parents to have the freedom to look at different schooling options. Not just parents with money, but all parents. It's one of the reasons why I want to increase the availability of scholarship dollars so lower income parents could afford private schools that may, for instance, reinforce the religious values. That's also why I believe parents who incur out-of-pocket expenses ought to get a tax credit to help cover those out-of-pocket expenses.
Mr. Franks, your response.
The very process through which we enact new laws for New Jersey has become skewed. That's because the role of powerful special interests have become too dominant in our state's capital. That's why I've suggested some important reforms. Most particularly, I want to give the citizens of New Jersey the right of initiative and referendum, a right that is enjoyed by citizens in some 26 other states, where when the legislature or the governor turn a deaf ear to the people of New Jersey, they will be able to circumvent that legislature or that governor and put a question directly on the general election ballot, cutting through the influence of the special interests. Secondly, I would eliminate the so-called legislative leadership political action committees, which allow the most powerful special interests to contribute up to $37,000 each to legislative leaders of both parties. Those are the leaders who determine what the agenda ought to be in Trenton. I think we ought to banish those political action committees. It's too cozy a relationship between the special interests and the legislature.
Your 30-second rebuttal.
I'm not sure if that has much to do with values per se, but while we're off the track, again, he commented about the difference in levies between the end of the fiscal year 92 and today. Is that 79% even there? The point I've made is that our levy is down from where it was the year before I came into office, and the thing that's important for your viewers to realize is that levy was subsidized by $40 million of bonding that Governor Florio allowed those, my predecessor, to pay for regular operating costs like police salaries with. So in fact, if they actually had to get the money from the people to cover those bills, it would have been a $140 million tax levy.
Jerry Gray, your question now for Mr. Franks.
Mr. Franks, on a number of levels, education, law enforcement methods, economics, sprawl, there's a pronounced divide between urban and suburban New Jersey that frequently puts its residents at odds. What would you do as governor to heal this rift?
Jerry, we live in the most densely populated state in America. The borders between our communities spill over from neighborhood to neighborhood. They're artificial boundaries for most practical purposes. We need to make sure that all of our residents understand that for any of us to succeed in New Jersey, all of us need a chance to succeed. I will work to make sure that I have a state government that's responsive to all the people in New Jersey. And I'll make a particular effort to bridge the achievement gap between our urban schools, the Abbott districts, and those more successful school districts in the suburban areas. We need to make a commitment to utilize the resources of New Jersey in a way that is not taking into consideration whether or not someone lives in one county or another, but devises the kind of approach that will help lift all boats, the kinds of policies that will improve the quality of life for all New Jerseyans. When we talk about mass transit investments,
Time
when we
is
talk
up.
about
Time
other...
is up. Mr. Schundler?
One of the ways we could immediately help families that are struggling is by lowering their taxes. President Bush's tax cut proposal would have eliminated taxes for families making $35,000 that have 2 children. It would have lowered taxes by 55% for families with 2 children that made $50,000. Those would have been huge cuts that could have helped people dramatically when it comes to trying to make ends meet. But my opponent opposed President Bush's tax cut proposals. He was out there with Al Gore and Jim Jeffords, who has now left the Republican Party, saying that we could not afford to give people this tax break. Well, the bottom line is the people who are having a hard time affording making ends meet are working New Jerseyans, and we should be helping them. This high national tax does nothing more than take our New Jersey dollars and send it elsewhere. I think you know that we have fewer dollars that come back to this state than anywhere else in the United States. We get a lower portion of our dollars back from the federal government.
Your rebuttal, Mr. Franks.
I wasn't with Al Gore. I wasn't with Gary Hart. I was with Ronald Reagan. And candidly, Bret, the last weekend of this fall's campaign where George Bush could have been anywhere, he came to campaign for Bob Franks for the United States Senate. It's because George Bush knows that Bob Franks is a tax cutter. He voted for $1.4 trillion in cuts in federal taxes. Bob Franks led the revolt against Jim Florio's $2.8 billion tax hike. I rolled back the Florio sales tax increase. Bob Franks cut
Time
state
is up.
spending by over $1 billion.
Michael, your question goes to Mr. Schundler.
Mayor Schundler, in recent weeks we've been reading and hearing about a shortfall in state revenues in the range of $1 billion to $1.6 billion. Given this new austerity in Trenton, do you still think you'll be able to fulfill 2 of your pledges, namely increase state aid to municipalities in order to lower property taxes and gradually lower income tax rates?
Yes, I do, Michael. And this gets back to what I talked about in my opening comments. We have to be able to learn to do more while spending less. The state is proposing to take our spending per child in the Jersey City School District up from $14,000 per child up to $19,000 per child next year, in 1 year. And then they want to spend $1 billion building new schools to decrease classroom overcrowding. If you figure out how much is that debt service for that $1 billion in construction, equal per child, that's $3,500 right there. When you add in other factors, we'll be well over $20,000 per child. Now, I think we can do a lot better than that. The tax proposal I have to increase giving to scholarship foundations would actually cost the state on average only about $1,000 per year to make it possible, given that you also have a federal benefit and a charitable giver helping parents, to fill empty seats in currently existing schools in our urban areas. There are tens of thousands of empty seats in those urban school districts. We could save billions of dollars in new school construction that the state proposes to make. We could save hundreds of millions of dollars per year in what it would cost to staff up those new public schools.
Your response,
we could use the
Mr.
savings
Franks.
to lower taxes.
No one running for governor in the year 2001 has the degree of experience that Bob Franks does in eliminating budget deficits. As a member of the House Budget Committee, I helped to write the first balanced budget in a generation. We got rid of over $220 billion a year in red ink in the federal budget, and we didn't impair one important service that the people of this country relied upon. When I was in the state legislature, I helped roll back Jim Florio's sales tax increase and went beyond that, actually ended up cutting state spending in 1992 by over $1 billion. I've also made proposals that we should elect a statewide auditor general whose sole responsibility it should be to help us root out the fraud, the waste, and the abuse in our state budget. Also, let me comment that we need to evaluate the thousands of programs that make up state spending to make sure that we get 100 cents in value for every dollar we send to Trenton. These programs are built up year after year after year without that kind of scrutiny.
Mr. Schundler, your 30-second response.
When I faced the deficit coming in Jersey City, I found a way to get taxes down instead of raising them. When he faced a deficit when he was in the Assembly in the 1980s, he increased the statewide sales tax. And he didn't stop there. He increased gas taxes, he increased cigarette taxes, he increased alcohol taxes, he increased taxes on hotel stays, he increased taxes on hospital visits. Across the board, he found that the best way to deal with the deficit was to raise taxes. I think the best way is to actually to get down spending.
Matt Purdy to Mr. Franks.
Mr. Franks, you cast yourself as an outsider eager to come in and reform Trenton. Why should people feel you are the person to accomplish this task, given that your party has been in power for 8 years, that you were chairman of the Republican Party in the state, and that party leaders asked you to run as a substitute when acting Governor Donald DeFrancesco dropped out of the race?
Matt, I've been a reformer for 20 years in government. I've worked from within the system to bring about meaningful change. The first bill that I wrote as a member of the General Assembly in 1980 was a bill called State Mandate, State Pay. And it represented at the time the radical notion that any time the state government would mandate a program upon a county or a municipality, the state government would have to come up with the funding to pay for it and not burden the property taxes in any community or in any county. That took 9 years to pass the legislature, but the origin of that effort for state mandate, state pay came from my first bill. In 1982, I was a reformer when I wrote a comprehensive initiative and referendum constitutional amendment, which would have let the people into the lawmaking process when government turns a deaf ear. I imposed term limits on myself as a member of Congress. I cut my own take-home pay by 5% as a member of the House to help retire the national debt. I helped write the first balanced budget in a generation.
Time is up. Mr. Schundler?
He calls himself a reformer. He says that he's going to get INR passed. Well, he was state party chairman. He campaigned on that and said if the Republicans took control of the legislature, they'd pass INR. We got 58 seats, the largest margin I've ever seen in my lifetime, and yet we didn't get INR passed. So he talks about reform during the campaign, but then when he gets his way and he wins an election, what actually happens? You didn't see anything happen. He talks about, let's say, the influence of money in politics. Well, he was the #1 receiver of pharmaceutical company contributions of any candidate in the United States House of Representatives. Then he introduces a Clarendon bill to extend its patent so you don't see consumers able to get that same drug at lower prices through a generic brand. Is that reform or is that serving the people who have been your major campaign contributors? He goes to the House of Representatives and asks for 2 exemptions from traditional House rules with regard to gifts so that he can receive wedding gifts from lobbyists far above the $250 limit for gifts, and then so he can also hide who's actually giving and what it is for.
Rebuttal, Mr. Franks.
I led the fight against Jim Florio's $2.8 billion tax hike. I rolled back the Florio sales tax increase. I cut spending by more than $1 billion when I was in the state legislature. I cut taxes at the federal level by $1.4 trillion. I helped write the first balanced budget in a generation. I cut my own pay to help repay the national debt. I'm an ardent sponsor of initiative and referendum, and there's one difference, Bret. Bob Franks, when 15 years ago was a member of the Assembly, had limited influence. As governor, I'll get INR for the people of New Jersey.
Jerry Gray, your question to Mr. Schundler.
Mr. Schundler, New Jersey still has the highest insurance rates in the nation. And just this week, the state was hit with new turmoil when State Farm said they would withdraw. Do you have a specific plan to address high auto insurance rates and competition in the state?
I think the most dramatic way that you can immediately reduce premiums is by allowing consumers or drivers to have the choice of whether or not they want to have pain and suffering coverage. That part of your insurance bill actually takes up about 30% of your premiums. And it operates kind of like a lottery where you pay, and unfortunately in this system, you have to pay, and then if you win the lottery, you get a big payout. It's not like insurance where you have lots of little incidents along the way and it's there to cover. Most people will never, ever, ever sue for pain and suffering, but here, to preserve the right, you end up having to pay a premium which is almost 30% higher according to a RAND study. Now, I would like to suggest that you shouldn't have to pay for what you don't want to do. If you don't want to have the right to pay for pain and to sue someone for pain and suffering, you should be able to say no to that coverage, and you should be able to save the 30%. I don't buy lottery tickets myself. I don't choose to. I don't have any expectation of collecting there, and I'd just as soon not have to buy them. That's what's happening right now in the automobile insurance system, though. People are having to pay for something they may never want to use.
Mr. Franks.
I believe the Department of Insurance has been painfully slow in implementing the reforms under the 1998 Automobile Insurance Reform Law. They were supposed to have enacted a comprehensive medical fee schedule, but it is not fully implemented even today. A dental fee schedule, the same way. An arbitration procedure that would help reduce costs and reduce time, it too is not yet implemented. So we haven't yet seen the benefit of all the cost containment measures of the law that the legislature passed. The good news for New Jersey drivers is that every motorist in this state has gotten at least a 15% reduction in rates. That's a step in the right direction. For the first period since 1995, for 2 years in a row, our average premiums have finally fallen below $1,000. We've got to allow those full reforms to kick in. State Farm should give those full reforms a chance to work before they pull the plug on 880,000 New Jersey drivers. They are not going to talk Bob Franks into a rate increase. That would be the wrong medicine.
Your rebuttal?
Now, Bob Franks has never been a chief executive, so he has an idea that he'll be able to do these things, but he's never actually done them. I have. We went out and we put into place an innovative approach to providing health coverage for our employees that saved the city of Jersey City $500 per employee family. No one was told that they had to choose this option. It was added to the 3 options it always had through the state health benefits plan. But because it provided better coverage, they chose it. It ended up lowering our costs. When we have this model applied more broadly across the state, it will also decrease all insurance costs, including car insurance costs.
Michael, your question to Mr. Franks.
Congressman Franks, my question is about the city of Camden, New Jersey's poorest city. Acting Governor DeFrancesco announced a plan recently to infuse Camden with $150 million and appoint a state overseer there. Camden officials have balked, saying local leaders democratically elected would be rendered powerless under this plan. Does the state need a powerful overseer to ensure accountability in the spending of state tax dollars in Camden, or should local leaders retain control of state aid?
I would support the Camden bailout measure if I thought it had even the remotest opportunity for success. I believe it wouldn't succeed. No matter how much money we pour into Camden, money from the state government alone is not going to cure all the ills of Camden, New Jersey. We need a fundamental change in policy. We need to create incentives for people to move back into Camden. And you can use the tax code of New Jersey in an effort to do that. I would take a page out of Governor John Engler's book in Michigan, where he's created tax-free zones and tax-free municipalities, actually alleviating the need for local residents to pay the income tax, pay the sales tax, pay the local property tax. And if we encourage people to move into the city by lowering the tax rate, we can draw middle-class residents to some of the buildings like the RCA building, where we're building some luxury loft apartments. There are some great assets in Camden. The waterfront, now with the aquarium, with the battleship, with the ballpark, with Rutgers Camden University.
Your time is up. Mr. Schundler, your response.
The first thing we have to do to revitalize our cities is we have to reform education. As you know, I was the prime mover behind the charter school legislation, and we have 10 charter schools in Jersey City. That's one of the reasons why people feel more comfortable raising their children in Jersey City and why our population is growing again. My crime strategies also work more successfully than any other across the state of New Jersey. You see our crime rate has fallen down a lot more than any other of the cities, fallen more than the state average, whereas the fall in crime has now plateaued across the state. It's still falling precipitously in Jersey City. Whereas other cities continue to lose people and lose jobs, we've had 10 times the job growth as New Jersey's 5 other largest cities put together. While their property taxes are going up, ours are down. It's because we know how to run a city, and I can help Camden see how they can seize opportunities and provide safer streets, lower taxes, and better schooling opportunities, and through that make the city an attractive place for people to live and bring their businesses. With that done, I think the state should then work in partnership with the leadership in Camden to set up an economic development corporation for reinvestment in the business areas of the city.
Your rebuttal opportunity.
The problem is property taxes. The problem is that taxes are too high in New Jersey. We cannot impose higher taxes on city residents and believe that will lead to an economic rebirth of that city. This is a letter that Mayor Schundler sent out in 1995 to the residents of his own Jersey City. Let me read the most important paragraph. Accordingly, I believe that the time has come for the city to exercise its right to implement a 1% corporate payroll tax.
I must stop you. The time is up. Matt,
I have a follow-up.
yes, you may.
Mayor
Michael?
Schundler, to just quickly respond to that.
Sure. The state had come in and proposed that they would slash Jersey City's state aid so that we would get just a fraction of what we were at the end of the Florio administration. The issue then became, well, what do we do? Do we lay off the entire workforce? Do we increase property taxes? What we thought we should do is try to see if we could find savings. But in the meanwhile, we decided that we would pass a payroll tax because we had the legal right under New Jersey state law. And by passing it, we would grandfather it so we could have it in the future, and then we would end it. To be perfectly clear, we were told by the state.
Time is up, Mr. Schundler. And Matt, your opportunity now to ask a question of Mr. Schundler.
It's now accepted political wisdom in New Jersey that racial profiling is a problem. But it wasn't acknowledged by the Whit administration until well after a judge ruled it existed and 3 young men, minority men, were shot by state troopers on the turnpike.
Right.
Do you believe the Whitman administration acted properly in handling racial profiling? And if you had been governor during the mid-1990s, how, if at all, would you have reacted differently?
I think one of the things Governor Whitman and Peter Venera both had a tendency to do was to go into a community, give a press statement, answer questions from the press, and then leave, as opposed to staying to hear what people in the community had to say about problems. As a mayor who does regular community meetings, I can tell you that more often than asking questions, people unload on you and tell you about all the problems that exist. I think if the governor or the attorney general had done that, they would have heard from citizens about the problem of racial profiling. They would have been aware of the magnitude of the problem, and they would have taken corrective action. It's because you didn't have that feedback loop that I think things unfortunately did not go addressed as they might have. In Jersey City, we've succeeded in integrating our police department and having it be more sensitive, partly because it's more diverse. We did that without quotas. We did that without grading civil service exams on a scale. What we did was aggressively recruit top-flight African-American Hispanic candidates into the department. And by having now a more diverse department, you have people who are working as a team, who are becoming more appreciative of each other and their background, and I think treating citizens better. And I might add that...
I don't have time for you to add that, but Mr. Franks, you have to have your response time.
I've made it a habit of holding hundreds of town hall meetings during the period of my service to the people of New Jersey. I will continue that tradition in every one of New Jersey counties. I will be in every county at least once per year in each of the 4 years of my term, and I want to hear these concerns directly from the people of our state, unvarnished, not through aides, not through intermediaries. I want to hear these people who have a problem come to me and comment. Secondly, let me say that racial profiling is absolutely and fundamentally wrong. A basic right of the people of New Jersey is to know that the laws of this state will be applied in a racially blind manner. People will not be discriminated against on the basis of their race, their creed, their national origin. The bottom line is that we know that racial profiling has existed largely because of inadequate training and supervision. As governor, I will make certain that the relationship between the state police and the governor is one of strict accountability. I won't let anybody else pass the buck.
Just use my last 30 seconds, Michael, to finish on the payroll tax question. Jersey City and Newark had always had the power to institute a payroll tax. Newark has had it for the last so many decades. We've never had it. We were told at the end of 1995 that if we didn't institute it by the end of the year, we'd lose the power to ever have one. We decided that we would pass it for 1 quarter, given that the state was proposing to slash our aid. We figured that way we could grandfather it, where if we actually needed it, we could institute it. Well, the bottom line is I found a way to cut our budget even further, even with the aid that was taken away. So we didn't need it, and we don't have it today.
All right, we are now going to, gentlemen, take some questions from the audience. NJN State House correspondent Jim Hooker is standing by in the audience with that portion of tonight's program. Jim?
Kent, thank you. And may we have your name, please, ma'am?
My name is Amani Hammond,
And where do you live in New Jersey?
East Orange.
Okay, and you have a question for candidate Franks?
Yes. Mr. Franks, I'm under the impression that you are opposed to President Bush's dividing of how the funding for the beaches. And I was wondering...
Beach replenishment?
Beach replenishment. And I was wondering, as a Republican, how do you feel, what is the limit that the federal government should go to in funding or bailing out a state? And if there is a limit, what should that limit be?
Thank you for your question. First and foremost, the beaches of New Jersey and our ocean are perhaps our most valuable natural resource. It is not only a source of enormous recreational opportunity for the people of our state and our region, but it's an economic engine. Tourism represents a $30 billion business in this state. More than $15 billion of that business comes from the Jersey Shore. We need to protect the quality of our ocean and our beaches, not only for recreation purposes, but those beaches protect literally billions of dollars of property behind them. The federal government has always been willing to pay for 65% of beach replenishment projects. The reality is Bill Clinton tried to reduce that to 35%. Unfortunately, President Bush is now saying that he wants to lower it to 35%. We cannot allow it to happen. This is a precious natural resource. The beaches that run along the east and west coast are used by
Schundler,
hundreds of millions
your
of people
response.
every year.
I think the next governor has to be an advocate and an effective advocate at the federal level to get the feds not to cut funding. Again, as you've heard, Jersey City has frequently experienced the state government cutting funding for it. That's partly a compliment, because as we've gotten stronger financially, they've made the decision that they'll just slash our funding. I would have liked to be able to dramatically reduce our property taxes, but the state kept on taking money. I will be an effective advocate, however, as I was able to get the state to not cut as much as they proposed by showing how vital it was not just for Jersey City to have state funding for municipalities, but for all of our communities. All across the state, we've seen municipalities lose funding from the state government. I would like to be an advocate that gets that money back for our municipalities to lower property taxes. I'd like to be an advocate at the federal level to make sure that New Jersey gets its due so we can have our beach replenishment program fully funded, as well as other necessary programs.
Mr. Franks.
You know, I want to go back to Bret's answer because he talks about all these reductions in state aid, which forced him to tell the people of Jersey City he needed a brand new payroll tax. Bret, I've got the figures right here, and I challenge you to tell me they're not true. They're from the Office of Management and Budget. They're certified by the Department of Community Affairs. In 1993, Jersey City received $72 million of state aid. Last year, it received $92 million in state aid. Each and every year, it has gone up, except in 1999.
I have to stop you because we have another member of the audience who would like to ask the candidates a question. Jim.
Thank you, Kent. Your name, sir, please.
James Colby,
And where do you live in New Jersey?
Pittsgrove Township,
Okay, and your question
My
for
question-
candidate Schundler?
is for both gentlemen tonight. My question, gentlemen, to you tonight is, what enforcement would you force on New Jersey Transit to provide to the residents of South Jersey additional service where it's needed? Mostly because of the 3 casinos coming online, people are going to ride the bus. And there is not a sufficient amount of service nor express service from the area in which I reside.
Mr. Schundler, your response first.
The governor is the person who ultimately appoints the board members in New Jersey Transit. They have the authority through that influence to direct that New Jersey Transit improve the service it provides in South Jersey. And the bottom line is if that we run our operations more efficiently, you will see the state not cutting back service. They'll be able to afford to give better service. Again, in Jersey City, my crime rate is down. We have more police officers on the street, even though we have 20% fewer employees than we did when I came into office. We found a way to target our resources where it really made a positive difference in improving services, and I can do that with New Jersey Transit. I'd just like to close on this point with Bob Franks citing aid that Jersey City gets. The number he suggested is only from 2 out of 3 major aid categories for the city. Jersey City was getting $93 million under Jim Florio. Today it's getting $82 million. That's an $11 million reduction. Bob does not like to present accurate facts. He has said these untrue things frequently during the course of this campaign.
All right, Mr. Franks.
Mass transit is a key to this state's future. It's a key to relieving the problem of traffic congestion. We need to encourage people to get off of our overly congested roadways, out of their single-passenger automobiles, and onto the buses and onto the rails. We need monies to make that investment. As a member of the House Transportation Committee, I wrote the federal funding formula for transportation assistance, which gave New Jersey an additional $1 billion in mass transit assistance over the course of the T21 program. When I was in the legislature, I sponsored the renewal of the Transportation Trust Fund, because not only is a world-class transportation system a means by which to alleviate traffic congestion, but that transportation infrastructure is the linchpin of this state's economy. We need to make sure that there is a fair allocation of transit resources to both North and South Jersey. I am committed to bringing about more mass transit. I'll name particularly one project, the Ocean-Monmouth-Middlesex rail line, which will help get people off the Parkway and Route 9.
30-second rebuttal, Mr. Schundler.
I think the bottom line is if you have someone willing to make the commitment and provide the dollars, you will get the service. And I'm making you the commitment. I will provide the dollars, and they'll be there because I'll make the savings where they are possible. I've talked throughout this campaign about the fact that, again, we can save billions of dollars to propose school construction in our urban areas and fill the tens of thousands of seats that already exist in privately managed schools for a fraction of the cost. We can decrease classroom overcrowding and do it faster. He is not taken that, he's not willing to look at that opportunity. He wants to go forward with this massive bonding.
Time is up.
And there won't be any money left for other priorities if you do.
Thank you to the members of the audience for your questions this evening. We are now going to rejoin our panel of reporters for more questions for the candidates. Jerry Gray, your question now goes to Mr. Schundler.
Mr. Schundler, with all due respect to the Democrats, the Republican primary has taken on a roughness and a tone that many voters would associate with Democratic primaries.
Right.
There's been talk of hypocrites, liars, and shutter liberals. What's going on with the GOP?
Well, you know, the bottom line is I've mentioned a couple things with regard to my opponent. I've mentioned that when he faced a deficit in the Assembly, he voted for a statewide sales tax increase and a series of other taxes. I've mentioned the fact that he voted with Jim Florio 90% of the time. Yes, he didn't support the tax hike then because the Democrats were in the majority. He let the Democrats do that, but he voted for the spending. I mentioned the fact that when George Bush proposed cutting taxes, he opposed the Bush tax plan and supported Gore's position. Now, that's what I've said about him. But then you look at what he's done with regard to speaking about me. You have this flyer, for instance, where he actually changed a quote where the actual quotation in a state audit of Jersey City used the word management. He put the word mismanagement in his flyer. He just changed outright the quote from the audit as if it was suggesting that Jersey City was mismanaged in some way. You look at him saying that we've raised property taxes 79% when our tax levy is $102 million today. It was $103 million the year before I came into office. Now, these are patently untrue things. There's a big difference between what I'm saying about him and
Mr. Franks, you have an opportunity to respond.
Here he goes again. The tax levy was $98 million in the last full fiscal year before Mayor Schundler was elected mayor. It's $103 million today. Bret, 103 is larger than 98. I didn't send this letter proposing to implement a new payroll tax on the citizens of Jersey City. You chose to. This is not the direction I would want to go. You base your whole campaign on one school choice proposal that you say will offer property tax relief to the citizens of New Jersey and put extra money in the state coffers. It was done at the Heartland Institute. It was done by a man by the name of Joseph Bast. I looked into Mr. Bast's background, and he's taken some other interesting positions. Mr. Bast, upon whom you base your economic analysis for your own proposal, wrote a proposal that said we should stop the war on drugs and legalize drugs. Bret, that economics is all wrong. So are the economic analysis behind your school choice proposal.
You have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
We're talking about how you save money. And there are a whole series of other proposals I've come out with over the course of this campaign. Proposals on how you can get the tolls off the Parkway. Proposals on how you can reverse Mount Laurel. Bob's been against all of those proposals. But what are his proposals for the state of New Jersey? He's gone out there and said he'll have an auditor. This is his agenda. Well, where's his actual proposal to reduce spending? Where's his actual proposal to reverse sprawl and revitalize our cities and preserve green space? Where's his actual proposal to deal with the aggravation of the Parkway today?
Michael Aron, your question goes to Mr. Franks.
Congressman Franks, one of your other proposals is term limits on legislators. The New York Times recently wrote an article looking at the experience of term limits in state legislatures and noted that of 19 states that instituted term limits in the 90s, 10 are now seriously considering undoing them. A couple of quotes from representatives in those states. Quote, "I think regular people would be alarmed if they really knew how much influence lobbyists now have over this system." Quote, "If term limits get rid of the dead wood, the problem is they get rid of the live wood too." Maybe you're 10 years too late with this proposal?
Michael, what a revelation. Elected officials may be expressing opposition to term limits. There's a novel concept. I guarantee you, Michael, if a term limit proposition is pushed before the people of New Jersey, they will adopt it. Moreover, I don't know of any state in America that had this embodied in their state's constitution that have chosen to remove it from their constitution. I believe that term limits suggest that we should move to get new and fresh ideas in the legislature periodically. I think 12 years is long enough to serve. I think somebody can make an enormous contribution over that period of time. If you serve beyond that, 20 and 30 years, as members can do, they develop too cozy a relationship with the very interests that often their committees are responsible for policing. I think that works against the public's interest. I think it would be great for New Jersey to have citizen lawmakers instead of career politicians.
Your
I favor
response,
term
Mr.
limits.
Schundler.
I do favor term limits, and I do think there's a value there to move away from career politicians towards people who actually have real life experience. Now, Bob Franks, as you know, is a career politician. When he's not been in government, he just got himself a job as a lobbyist to lobby his old friends in government. Now, there's problems with that. I look at Don DeFrancesco, who makes $500,000 a year lawyering, and he never lawyers. He doesn't have time to do that. He makes that money because he has a position of influence, and people figure they better have him as their attorney because they might be able to help him out at some point in the future in a bind. Now, I think there's a problem with having people who are there for so long, building all that influence and trading on it. And I see that in Bob Franks and the people who are supporting him. That's one of the reasons I am running for governor. I want to have this state actually work and serve the people of New Jersey. I think I can have that work just as it did in Jersey City. I didn't run for Jersey City having been in government in a prior office before. I came out of the business sector. But I saw the ability to bring common sense ideas
I have to stop you
and solve problems,
and
I
ask
did.
for your rebuttal. 30 seconds, Mr. Franks.
You know, Bret, last year I ran against somebody who would spend anything to get elected. This year I appear to be running against someone who will say anything to get elected. You just told these people that I was a lobbyist who signed up to lobby my former colleagues in the Congress. Bret, that's a lie. I was never a lobbyist, never chose to register, never would, was never a lobbyist. That's just another untruth you're trying to tell the people of New Jersey.
Matt, you have a question now for Mr. Schundler.
Yeah. To improve education, both of you have spoken about increasing school choice and raising standards. But people who run schools say that the most immediate and perhaps most difficult problem they face is the severe shortage of people to teach in classrooms. Mm-hmm. As one solution, the NJEA, the teachers union, has recommended raising the minimum salary of teachers to $40,000. Do you support this idea? And specifically, what would you do to attract more people to the profession of teaching?
I absolutely reject that idea. I think the state has put far too many mandates on our local districts, and that has just driven up costs. Instead of putting up another mandate that will drive property taxes to the roof, we should actually reverse so many of these mandates. If you look at your local public schools in New Jersey, we're spending almost $10,000 per child before you take into account things like the cost of the building, the cost for other special categorical needs beyond what they call the base student amount. If you look at 25 kids in a class, that's $250,000 being spent on the education of those children. The teacher's making a fraction of that, even when you include their benefits. You look at all the other in-classroom costs like heat and hot water and electricity and the cost for books and pencils. Only about half of the dollars being spent for those children is making it into the classroom because of all this bureaucracy outside the classroom. We ought to decrease the state interference and bureaucracy, allow more of the money that's already being spent to go into the teacher's pay. And then you'll see more people coming in, not with higher property taxes being the result, but simply because you're using the money you already have more efficiently. I'm proposing that the state provide an incentive to school districts.
Time is up. And Mr. Franks.
I wrote the first bill in the legislature about state mandate, state pay. The last thing we should do is mandate from Trenton how much local school districts should pay their teaching professionals. That is a decision that I would choose to leave to local community residents. Secondly, I believe in merit pay. I believe that New Jersey should have a system of performance-based pay. I know that the union is against it, and I hope they may come around on this issue. But I think it's important to designate the most able teachers we can find as worthy of getting an extra cash payment. This is probably the most important profession. We entrust our children to teachers every day. Let's create excellence among teachers. Let's raise the bar. 30% of teachers in New Jersey will retire over the course of the next 10 years. To draw the best and the brightest into the teaching profession, let's have merit-based, performance-based pay. That will help bring more people
Your 30
in.
second
He said he
rebuttal.
wrote the state mandate, state pay bill, but you see, we still have these state mandates and the state's not paying. So clearly the bill he wrote is not effective at all. What would be effective is providing an actual direct incentive to school districts to move those dollars into the classroom and decrease bureaucracy, and that's what I'm proposing. I also, while I support merit pay, it's not enough. You also have to create accountability with regard to the other side. What happens if someone's not performing? I think we have to reform tenure. I also believe we ought to move our school board elections to November and have nonpartisan November school board elections so that the school board is accountable to the broader community, not just the
I have
organized
to move
interest
it
groups that
along.
can dominate a low turnout April election.
Jerry, your question now for Mr. Franks.
Mr. Franks, it's likely that the next governor will face overseeing the first execution in New Jersey since the Supreme Court restored the death penalty. Both you and Mr. Schundler support the death penalty. But the question is that some have argued that life in prison without the possibility of parole is a harsher penalty. Do you agree?
I don't, Jerry. I believe that there are some crimes so heinous by their very nature that they deserve to be imposed upon with the death penalty. Having said that, we have to be extraordinarily careful before the state takes anyone's life. Specifically, DNA testing, genetic research now available to us, has helped us to identify cold-blooded killers, and it has helped to exculpate others who were on death row. I would insist that all of those state-of-the-art technologies be made available in any trial where the death penalty could be imposed. We can't afford to make a mistake. But on the other hand, I do believe that the death penalty can act as a deterrent and as an appropriate expression of our society, that it simply will not tolerate certain kinds of vicious, violent behavior.
Your response, Mr. Schundler.
Bob Franks and I have the same views on these issues, so I won't go through all the same things. What I will say is that if you look at violent crime in Jersey City, again, it's down dramatically. You look in Woodbridge, it's up 50% since Jim McGreevy's been mayor, and he's been mayor during the same period that I've been mayor. His tax levy is up 70%. My tax levy, again, is down from where it was the year before I came into office. You see my tax levy down and my crime rate down. You see his tax levy up and his violent crime rate up. What that shows is I'm a better manager. When we get into this November election, people are going to say, who actually knows how to make our streets safer? I'm going to have a record they can look to. Bob Franks doesn't have a record. Bob Franks has never managed a government. He's been a vote, typically with the entire caucus, but not always. When his first year in Congress, he voted with Bill Clinton more than 50% of the time. And you saw that if you compare that to Marge Rockema, she was in the 40s. You compare that to Dick Zimmer, he was down in the 30s. They're not exactly, real conservative Congress people. But Bob Franks was way out there. He was...
The time is up, and I have to ask you for your 30 seconds rebuttal.
This continues to amaze me. Taxes are up 19% according to the National Review, not according to Bob Franks. Taxes temporarily went down, but they shot right back up. Bret, if you're going to take credit for your 5-month tax holiday, then you have to take blame for the fact that in 1995, taxes in Jersey City went up 51% after your one-shot deal wore off. If you're going to take credit for your scholarship program, giving out over $800,000 worth of scholarships,
all right,
you've got to take responsibility for the money you spent on TV
The clock is ticking, and we have
ads.
time now for our closing statements. Both of the candidates are going to give us their closing statements now. You each have 90 seconds. We begin first with Mr. Franks.
During my 20 years of service to our state and our party, I've battled on behalf of Republican principles. I spearheaded the revolt against Jim Florio's record tax hikes, rolled back the Florio sales tax increase, and cut state spending by over $1 billion. As a member of the House Budget Committee, I took on Bill Clinton and the liberals in Congress who were responsible for decades worth of reckless deficit spending in our nation's capital. Don't let Bret Schundler or anyone else tell you otherwise. It was a Republican Congress who dragged Bill Clinton kicking and screaming down the road to a balanced budget, and the first meaningful tax relief since Ronald Reagan was president. In less than 2 weeks, you'll be asked to make a choice on behalf of the Republican nomination for governor. It's an important decision, especially now. After years of economic growth and prosperity, our state faces uncertain economic times. We need a governor who has the experience, the discipline, and the leadership to make the tough choices and defend our Republican values. I know what it takes to cut wasteful spending, to keep our budget in balance, and to create new opportunities for all New Jerseyans by cutting taxes. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. I ask for your support on Tuesday, June the 26th.
Mr. Schundler.
I've made specific proposals on how we can save billions of dollars in proposed state spending. If we don't take opportunities that present themselves to save money, we're not going to have the wherewithal to improve our rail system, to buy more open space, to have funding for beach reclamation if the federal government cuts some of the dollars we receive today. I've proposed specific solutions. Bob Franks has talked about getting an auditor to look at the problem and maybe he can figure it out. Well, the bottom line, in Jersey City, I did figure it out. Here you hear him saying that I've increased property tax to 79% one time, and then he says, well, it went from 98 to 102, which is 4% the way I count it. In fact, it was 103 million the year before, and we're down from where we were. And we're down despite the fact that the year before they were borrowing $40 million a year to cover their bills, and we didn't have that money, that borrowed money. We had to close a $40 million structural deficit, offset what translates into $75 million worth of inflation on a $300 million budget over the course of 8 years, offset an $11 million cut in state funding, and we did it by finding ways to do more while spending less. I can do more while spending less with the state's budget, and that will allow us to lower your property tax and give you the relief you deserve. I'll fix our schools so your children get a better education. I'll reverse Mount Laurel and reverse sprawl. I'll get the tolls off the Parkway. I've laid out an agenda that can get Democrats to vote for us, just as I was able to get Democrats to vote for me in Jersey City, where I won not only 3 elections in a row, but by the largest margin in Jersey City history with 69%, where I won 45% of the African American vote and 70% of the Hispanic vote,
Mr.
and we can win
Schundler
across the
and
state
Mr.
again.
Franks, that concludes our program this evening, the NJN New York Times Republican gubernatorial debate. I'd like to thank our candidates for participating in this forum this evening. I'd also like to thank our panel of reporters, Michael Aron, Matt Purdy, and Jerry Gray, for participating and for your questions, and our live audience here in our NJN studios. I'm Kent Manahan. Thank you for being with us this evening.